Welcome back to part two of a two-part series with Brett Parry from Aperian Global. Brett is the Director of Global Mobility, and if you didn't catch the last episode we did on the different cultural distinctives of the different areas of the U.S., make sure you stop, go back and listen to that because it's going to give you a really good idea of what this discussion is going to be. And jumping back into our discussion from a couple weeks ago, we talked about the different regions of the U.S. We talked about the Northeast, the Southwest. We talked about California and kind of how even in California there are wildly different sort of attitudes. We covered the Midwest, and what we really want to do this time is we're going to be talking about globally sort of where these different regions in the U.S. sort of map onto how other areas of the globe function. And so we're going to give people just a very brief rundown of kind of what areas we want to sort of find our cultural twins in the market. And then you're going to try and, I'm going to challenge you here to make that connection, find places in the globe that are similar to this place, but also call out maybe where they might be a little bit different and why that may matter. Okay?
Perfect.
All right, so just like last time, we're going to start in the Northeast. So where on the globe do you find places like what's in the Northeast?
You're going to find, especially related to when I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the idea of the origins of the Dutch settlement, of course, Northern Italian influence of Boston, New York, those kind of areas. And one might kind of then say, well, if I go to Amsterdam, it's a very fast-paced, very global city. The Dutch pride themselves on their historical ability to push their boats off the shore. It is a country that is 25 to 30% underwater, so they've had to be resilient and navigate the environment in which they exist on, and react to it in real time. So it's actually, that would be one kind of sense on the surface where you might say, okay, if I go to a place like that, it's very global, very open, very kind of flat structure, certainly direct communication. That is one of the things that Dutch people are famous for.
When I thought like New York City, I was like, oh yeah, London. It's just like,
Yes.
That's sort of, in my mind, the counterpart in the world to New York. Of course, you have you have Hong Kong and,
Yep.
but again, English influence there. So, yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I think I agree with you that, however, the directness for the British type of little bit more formal, reserved environment, the dynamics of business in London certainly is like that, but the interaction pace of which you might get feedback might be a little bit more delivered with softer elbows in that sense than a New Yorker or that kind of Dutch direct style. But when you go to London, you certainly feel the energy that exists in New York, right? So that's a physical, tangible feeling that you get. But then when you start to interact with people, it might be different. But it's a great example, certainly, and Singapore might come to mind in that sense. Very fast-paced, dynamic. I would even say my home city of Sydney, Australia, has now kind of really, and of course I'm biased because I'm Australian, but I think we love to think that we punch above our weight in terms of our ability to be recognized as a global city, and one in which that the fast-paced action really takes place in a place like Sydney because of its importance for many businesses and the way they do a business in that region from there.
One of the places I think about is like Tokyo. I'm pretty sure that's the biggest city on the planet, right? But so you do reach critical mass, you do have incredible industry, but then like you said, though, the culture of Tokyo is incredibly different, like could probably not be more different than a place like New York.
Well, the Japanese culture in and of itself, with its sense of hierarchy and honor and all of those kind of things that come with how they build relationships. And you can talk about the total opposite of directness in a place like Japan, where, my wonderful colleague says, well, Brett, here you have to really learn how to speak the air, which, that's okay, speak the air. It's like I don't know what smell is the color orange. I don't know, but that is the way that you kind of have to practice communications and understanding how concepts like namawashi influence the Tokyo, the Japanese culture when it comes to business, not only business but also the social interactions. The sense of whether you're soto or insider outsider. From an outsider's perspective, we can look at that and say, well, that's going to be very hard to navigate. Well, okay, yes, it may put up different barriers to navigate it, but given the right tools and the right knowledge and maybe the right kind of person alongside you guiding you, then you can really take advantage of these things. Yeah.
I really want to go to the Rust Belt next. So describe for me sort of the distinctives of the Rust Belt, sort of what the major cities are in the U.S. where people think of, this sort of exemplifies the bell curve of that ethos. And then where can we find that same ethos throughout the globe?
Again, let's draw on some of the people or some of the communities that settled the areas in the Rust Belt. Say, we talked about Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and it could be Toledo, Ohio as well. Very deeply connected in this sense of industrial type of resilience and loyalty and things like that. Now, if I may bring in the conversation, a country that I spend a lot of time in now, Poland, right? That is a country that ostensibly the people that left there came out of a history of 1,000 years of conflict. Poland is a Central European country. It is definitely the center of Europe. It has been put upon by many countries over its 1,000-year history, and that would be whether it's the Germans, the Russians, whether it's the Swedish, all of these, because it's a very important strategic area to control. Now, the resilience that comes with that, is passed down through generations, is very well matched and can be measured against the same kind of resilience that exists in a place like Detroit and Toledo and those kind of places. So from a psychological point of view and an embodied sense of we need to be tough because tomorrow is not guaranteed. And we need to have the tools and be ready to react to things that are completely out of our control. So it is really a sense of, maybe that's one example. There's probably so many around the world where that exists as well. Even in my home country of Australia, one of our biggest industries in Australia, the reason we have succeeded and punched above our weight in the global sense is through the sense of agriculture, right? Australia was built on the back of the sheep, they say. There's many more sheep than there are people in Australia. Also mining, right? And these industrial kind of hardworking, beads of sweat in your brow type of activities, when people show up to work, bring a real resilience. And before you start to talk about the animals that are trying to kill you, that may contribute to Australia.
Yeah.
You have to be quick on your toes to avoid the snakes. So
I feel like the Florida knows what you're talking about. Arizona, maybe. So if we're looking at the West Coast, and I don't know if we've really picked out their cultural twins anywhere else in the world. We have, the Southwest. I think we talked a little bit about the South, but then maybe like the Midwest. How do you want to explain sort of where these types of environments show up throughout the world?
So I always describe San Francisco very similar to my city of Sydney. So, very cosmopolitan, very kind of progressive, very action and expressive in that sense, dynamic. Melbourne's more like Chicago, where I live. There's arts and there's kind of a slower pace, and it's also a little bit colder in Melbourne. We always tell the Melbourne people that's why us Sydney-siders don't live there. It isn't that cold, not compared to the minus 30 degrees we see in Chicago. I did want to bring up a point about this, about being a little bit aware that if you live in a place like Chicago, for example, I'm going to bring this into the Polish context, pretty much the largest Polish population outside of Warsaw, right? We live in a suburb of about 15,000 people with 5 grocery stores. 3 of them are fully Polish speaking. That's how strong the Polish population is here. So I get to practice the language even when I go and buy milk, right? So that's an advantage. But there is a sense that the people that, like my wife, who have kind of been here for a few decades, they brought their traditions to America, and they still enjoyed practicing the language and the traditions that went along with that. But now I go to Poland, and the traditions that exist here in Chicago have kind of been forgotten a little bit about in Poland. Poland's kind of moved on, you know. It's been a very successful story in terms of once it joined the European Union, it really found its niche in opening itself up to a highly fast-paced, developed kind of opportunity environment where companies could come and invest and hire good talent at reasonable prices and really kind of move forward. Now we're seeing repatriation into Poland. Initially, it was an exodus out of Poland once they joined the European Union. Those people are coming home to Poland now. They're bringing different European values to colour the Polish environment. So again, I really enjoy this conversation, Zach. We just need to check our assumptions that, okay, if I live in Chicago and I've been around Polish people and then I'm going to go and do business in Warsaw, shouldn't I just take that experience with the Polish people in Chicago? And that would be that would be problematic. We want to make sense of our environment, and we often default to the basics. You know, we say, okay, this person does this, that's wrong, I don't like it, that kind of thing. It is about just training our mind to kind of move that initial fear response or fear flight response into our frontal cortex, because there's so many tools to be able to allow us to do this, and graciously use curiosity to understand where can I maybe leverage what my knowledge is going to be right about, but how can I learn from the things that I probably need to understand are going to be different? And we do that, you know, through our frontal cortex, our executive thinking. And that may happen in a split second, but it is such an important leap as us as humans. And again, you know, we've talked a lot about business. I mean, I work very, very personally and intimately with families face to face. And many of these people, I'm probably the first time they show up and they've been able to express their fear and their trepidation and their uncertainty about what is just ahead of them in terms of uprooting their whole life to another country. So it is so important for the personal side of it, because in many ways, that's the glue that holds the whole experience of moving to another culture together. But let's not also underestimate how difficult it is to move to a country that speaks your language, right? I could easily use my example. Yes, and it was certainly the case that really the reason I do this work, Zach, is because it's personal for me. This America really kicked my backside in a place where I ostensibly thought, yeah, I know these people, I can work these Americans out, and I didn't. But think about somebody who is from Colombia going to Madrid. And the use of the word, I always love this, I was taught this by many of my Spanish-speaking people, the term ahorita in Spanish, you know, which is related to time and when you're going to promise to do something. It's the same word in that language, but you ask a Mexican person, it means completely something different to an Argentinian in that language. And that's where we get caught, because that kind of pebble in the shoe that isn't, you know, is not, it's there, but you're kind of like, oh, should I get it out or could I keep walking? You know, you can't quite decide, you know, it's making me uncomfortable. I don't know why. Sometimes I feel it, sometimes I don't. That cognitive progressive load can show up one day when you wake up in the morning and you go, you know what, I can't do this. I just can't do it. I'm in an environment where I speak the same language. Even the food kind of is similar, right? And yet, why do I feel like I just cannot get out of bed? I'm completely overwhelmed, mentally drained, psychologically sad and miserable. You know, I'm sorry, it's a dark conversation sometimes, but it's a real one.
It is.
And so we have to understand where the differences lie and how we can use our own spirit and our own practices in self-care to navigate these spaces, both from a professional and personal point of view.
You know, I'm wondering, when you get to that place, is it because that you had sort of wrong assumptions going into it, or like maybe your expectations were different? But what sort of a mindset can somebody have that sets them up to thrive in that new environment and not end up where you were describing?
That's the easiest question in the world. I've worked with many people, and people at the top of their game, CEOs, senior executives. The common thread that runs through all of these people when they're successful in international business and cross cultures is curiosity. A deep thirst, unquenchable thirst for gaining knowledge, not only in their professional technical expertise and things like that, but again, this kind of putting a mirror up to themselves and recognizing who they are, how they're showing up for other people, and deeply curious about how can I build new skills every single day, as long as I'm on this planet, to serve the people that I'm with grace and dignity and inclusiveness. That's the magical thread when I work with these folks. I'm Australian, so I'm pretty egalitarian as far as I'm concerned. These people don't intimidate me, but I'm curious about them. I annoy especially my daughter. I'm in an airport. I'll hear somebody, speaking in a foreign language or a different accent. I'm deeply invested in, I wonder what that person's story is. And if I can just happen to strike up a conversation with them, by golly, I'm going to ask them. And my 16-year-old daughter, oh, Daddy, you're so embarrassing. But it is. I've really stolen that idea from all of the successful people that I've worked with. And I've gone every day of my life, if the person looks like me, sounds like me, doesn't mean that they are me, and I need to be curious. It helps if they look different and they sound different and they speak with them, or they pray different or they love different. I'm curious about what makes them tick, and how can I be a better person in service of using that connectedness to be both a personally more successful person, but also a professionally more successful person.
The people who are naturally fascinated and they've not let wonder die, in them, are best set up to be able to have, good relationships with anyone, right? And it doesn't matter sort of where you are. If you're naturally just like fascinated about other people, and like you're going to be here, might as well be fascinated by what's here, go search it out. But for people who are not naturally like that, how do they cultivate that though?
It's just really assessing what environments do you find yourself in, and is it really enriching or adding to your spirit, your knowledge? And are you doing the same thing? Are you able to offer something in that sense? And it kind of levels up your vibrational sense in these environments, and it makes you more aware, of who you are. So I think that would be one thing. I think that people could learn a little bit more, and I'm certainly not perfect at it. I have my own biases and reactions to people that certainly I think maybe don't have different values to me. I am as susceptible to it. I'm not perfect. And that's the ability to say, well, there's always something I can do. Surely there's something I can do to embrace my wider curiosity. And I love the way you put it. It's this sense of wonder, right? It's this sense of looking at the world like a child every day when you wake up and go, wow, this is just a pretty magical place. We get to share, and we are living longer, so we're actually having to put up with that for longer. So why not make it a great experience? Yeah.
All right. So this is my fun question that I wanted to ask you here. The International Space Station is like a really interesting thing to me, right? Because you have astronauts, a ton of different countries, all interacting in one environment. Say we do get a moon base up there, an international moon base in the next 15 years, right? And that grows a little bit. What does the culture of that moon base look like after 100 more years?
That is a great question, and it is certainly going to be unique. That physical space, far away from the Earth, is going to be a Venn diagram thrown together of the various contributions from the cultures of the people that contributed to its, not only the people physically on it, but the people who actually had the ideas and sparked the curiosity to look out to the stars and going, we can do this, right? I'd like to think that the people who live on that are really deeply appreciative of the legacy that they are trusted with to carry on, right? The dream that somebody had. It's like that analogy of it's always valuable to grow, to plant a seed for a tree you'll never get to sit under the shade of.
I have this sense that they're going to be ambitious in ways that we can't even imagine right now, right? If you think about like the tech startup culture of San Francisco, like we've talked about, and sort of that the enterprise aggressiveness of New York. I mean, imagine waking up every day, stepping outside your little hut or whatever it is that you step outside on the moon, and you're looking at Earth. You're looking at all the people that sent you up there, and all the years that had to pass in order for you to be standing where you're standing. And I assume that the people who are up there are probably there, like they're probably an engineer or, like they're working on something, right? And so if you have that mindset and you're situated there, I just like wonder what a critical mass of those people does. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. It's a really great question. But then do you have the realization, like when the first people, left the bounds of Earth, as Ronald Reagan says, and they look back at the Earth and then had a real humble experience of we are just a dot in a vast expanse of nothingness, and how much does it really matter? It might be fun in the time, but how much does it really matter? Or do I just sit with the presence of the wonder of what I get to experience? I don't know. You never know until you're in those spaces, right? And again, I talked about self-care. So if you're really into gardening, I'm not sure that's going to work either. You're not going to go outside in that environment and start growing trees and ferns and stuff like that. It's a really great metaphor and connection to the experience. Moving countries is like going to another planet in many ways, because even there are spaces, like I'm sure there's spaces in big cities that people can't grow gardens when they come off and they've come from rural Illinois, right? That's another point. But that's a great analogy. I think we should explore that. I think there's a book in you, Zach, about what that might look. That people can read later and they'll go, this guy was crazy. He didn't know anything.
I know. And then maybe they'll use it as a textbook.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. It'll be one of those famous tomes like C.K. Lewis and all of those kind of things.
This is I feel like it's confession time. My two favorite authors are C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton because they're the people that awaken that sense of wonder in me like no one else, Yeah.
And Viktor Frankl, you read that, book experience of coming out of concentration camp. Now, but the question is, how do you survive that? And, he said, I was surrounded by people who just lost that sense of wonder and hope in life. And even the most miserable and despairing environments, that's what he found, My mentor, Ben Zander, talks about in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, what was he thinking about for 30 years in jail? Lunch? No. He was thinking about the possibility of what was ahead when he knew, convicted in his heart, that he wasn't going to be there forever. What was he going to do? And after he came out, in a very short space of time, he had a deep effect on that country and the people that looked up to him, and he led them with grace and honor. You learn that, through those environments. So, yeah, it is a bit confession time. But I love these conversations. They're very kind of ethereal, and but they are deeply rooted in the personal experience of just making people aware. What can they do? How can they see the world in a different way? And how can they embrace these differences and leverage them? Let's face it, we're all in business. So at the end of the day, we need to put money in the bank, and anything we can remove from the barrier of supplying resources and all of that kind of thing for our families and our colleagues and all of that kind of stuff, that's an important aspect to it, not to forget the business side of it.
Taking it back to our industry, it's like, these things sometimes may seem a little bit philosophical or ethereal, but they have very practical outcomes, if you pay attention to them. If you are going to move somebody halfway around the globe or even a state across, but that environment is going to be wholly different than what they're used to, then, being able to prepare them so that they know what they're walking into and also put them around people who can, help them understand, hey, this is going to go better for you if we engage this opportunity with a sense of curiosity. If you've never had to do that before, here's some things I would look at, you know what I mean? And these are some things that I would explore. It's going to go better for you when you can sort of really engage the situation. It'll be more exciting, or you can turn some of that nervous energy into productive use.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the biggest contributors to failures of expat assignments, is just the struggle of adjustment that children have, or a spouse has. A husband of an assignee has had to give up their job, or a wife has had to give up their job and move to the country, to a new country, and without their network, their safety net, their support system, all of that kind of thing. The children have to navigate new social signals. The tangible stuff is obviously the food, the language, the accents, all of that kind of stuff. But the intangible things of social cues and peer group dynamics and all of those things. And let's not forget sheer weather. People from Brazil I work with that come and move to Detroit. It's like, okay, we need to understand the physical impact of lack of vitamin D and exposure on your skin, right? Look, you could spend days and days with people. In the work that we get to partner with NEI, and we're very gracious to do that, it is really, we are at the pointy end. I find myself, as somebody who does these trainings personally myself still, we're at the pointy end of representing, like you mentioned, all of those other operational things like visas and moving furniture and that. I have the deepest respect for all of your folks that pull all those levers, because I just have to do one thing. I just get the privilege of showing up personally with these people in very intimate environments. And then how can I use that to maybe help and apply it to the other people that are, obviously sometimes just coming in random times to affect these people's lives and then going away and moving on to somebody else. Again, it's a very personal, and I call this a duty of care, right? It is a duty of care, and I know, a company like NEI practice that deeply as well. That there is a business, tangible business. There's also a very social, impactful way of doing this as well.
Well, Brett, I want to thank you so much for sticking it out and doing this 2-part series. For me, these are my favorite ones to do. I love talking culture. Not everyone gets to move halfway across the world or, be moved into another environment like that. To help people stay curious is just a fascinating endeavor for me. And I want to thank you for coming on our podcast to have that discussion.
Well, it's my honor, Zach. Again, I would talk about this as long as the day is. And I'm always very appreciative for the partnership that we have, and thank you for all the work you do. And it's really been great to be able to share this and put this out there and be in service of that.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on another episode of Relocation Leader. Make sure you share all this with your audience and LinkedIn, and go like us on YouTube. It's been a wonderful time being able to put these podcasts together for you, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.